Welcome to another episode of the Supercoach Hub's NBL season. I am Barnesy, your host. I am going solo this week. Everybody else is a bit busy to get on as guests, so just going to be me, but that's all right. We can talk about NBL and Supercoach for a little while. Round 16 this week. It's going to be a big one. We've got 5 rounds left of the season, so getting to the pointy end. For me, last week, 463 seemed like a pretty good score, but in saying that, you guys and girls in the Supercoach Hub, you are absolute champions because there's been some really big scores and some really big runs too. I tell you what, number one, DG is just killing it. Vern had another really good week as well, and he's killing it as well. So well done to the Supercoach community. Now, if you want to be more a part of the SC Hub community, jump on the Discord. You can see the graphics up there just to jump straight on, which is great. And you'll get lots of help, lots of chat, and lots of talk to some of the content creators and contributors as well to the SC Hub. For me, you can find me as well on the NRL All-Stars podcast if you're into NRL Supercoach, or even if you just like rugby league, because we have rugby league episodes as well. Jump on there. But we are actually launching this week for 2024. So team previews of the Eels and also the Bulldogs ahead of the NRL season for Supercoach. Jump on board there. Subscribe to iTunes, Spotify, Amazon. We're just about everywhere. SoundCloud, you can jump on there and subscribe to. You'll get all the episodes straight away. But, well, fantastic preseason for the All-Stars podcast dropping soon too. But I'll continue on with the SC Hub, doing the NBL for you as well. Last round, there was some big scores. A little bit of a strategy chat. We'll talk about last round a little bit. So for me, one of the things that I decided a couple of weeks ago that I wanted to make sure that I did for the last couple of months of the season was to make sure that my whole team was good. I wanted to go gangbusters and kind of aim for, everybody scoring 40 to 50 points, including my bench guys. If I could get 40, 50 plus from everyone, that's what I was after. And I thought that it's quite achievable as a strategy. So to give you a bit of an example, my 463 on the weekend was almost a little bit disappointing, even though I went up some spots. So I had Milton Doyle as my captain, 118, which is pretty average for a captain. But I had some other ones who didn't go too well. Guys like Cheatham came in for me, 42 points across 2 matches was pretty average. But what it meant was, because I had so many 40-plus guys, it kind of saved me a little bit, because the guys that didn't go as well as what I'd hoped ended up getting balanced out, I guess, by the depth in my squad. Seeing a lot of teams, when I'm having a look at them, and also with the trades happening this week, that are going real light on the bench, and they're doing that to try and get 5 guns, 5 real big scorers in their starting 5. And I understand it, and it might be hard to sort of adjust from that at the moment. But one of the problems that I think teams are starting to run into now is that you're getting 50% of your bench scoring, and everyone keeps forgetting that. So when you've got guys that are scoring 10 points on your bench, multiple, you're getting 5 points, maybe 10 points from someone else, and the bench just isn't helping you enough. So certainly with guys that you can bench for a week because they don't have the double, but they're still going to score well, that's going to be the best thing for you. A really good example last round, in round 15, was McCall. So, Taj went in and grabbed, 52 points or 54 points in one game. And that was better than a lot of double game guys. So real good lesson to be learned for everyone there, where some of these top guys, you can hold them for a single or two, and it's going to be worthwhile because they can pump out a score just as good as anyone that's on a double, especially when you've got the middling guys that are maybe that 250 to 300K guy. They're not quite a star, but they're solid. Guys like McCall and some of these other big guns can definitely match them just with a single. So it does also help with your depth of your squad too. But I'm not going to ramble on about my strategy there, a little bit of a chat, but we're going to go straight into Market Watch now and check out the market and what's happening for the trades. Now, it is the pointy end. People are making some interesting decisions, and I think that some of them are probably following the crowd a bit too much if you're trying to chase. So that's something else to be wary of when you're having a look at Market Watch, when you're having a look at your trades. If you do follow the pack, you are going to maybe not move up as much as you want. So this is probably a good time 5 weeks out from the end of the season to decide, hey, am I going to be super aggressive, or am I sort of consolidating my top 100 spot and I want to not risk, losing that. Jalen Adams, number 1 most traded out player. I understand it. I get it. I own him. I won't be trading him. So Jalen Adams, I'm going to throw some stats out here. And one of the things with stats for everyone to remember is, they're a good indicator. They tell part of a story. It's not only about them. So don't think when I rattle these off that I'm saying, this is definitely going to happen or anything. But Jalen Adams, his average against Perth is right up there. He's got a 51.7 average against Perth. He loves playing them. His highest score, 65, which happens to be against Perth. Now, that's in a single game. He kills Perth. So it may not happen this week, but I tell you what, when he was absolutely on fire last round, when the Kings looked like they might be bouncing back and turning a corner, and he puts up that type of score last week, throwing up an 80 when he did virtually nothing that first game, it was a really good round for Jalen Adams. And I think the teams that did trade him out will be kicking themselves a little bit. And when you're having a look at his cost, I mean, 335,000, it's a bit of a bargain, especially if he keeps up not quite what he did the second game last week, but if he sort of keeps up that 30 to 35 type of average, it's going to be decent money for him. And you're not going to get a huge amount out of it. Like, you need to spend an extra $130,000 to go Jalen Adams to Bryce Cotton. Now, the other important factor, numbers-wise, Jalen Adams has a 14 break-even. He's going to make money this week. And then after this week, he has a double game round. And you're going to want him for that. It is the last double game round for the Kings, but you could certainly get 3 games for him across the next 2 weeks, which are going to be high scoring and really valuable. He could be a captaincy option for next week even. And then you're going to punt him and maybe make an extra 30, 40,000 out of him. It just makes too much sense to me to hold him. But he's not a must hold or anything like that. When we are having a look at the draw as well, it's interesting reading because there's some teams like Sydney who have the single this week. But when we're looking at the doubles, you've got the Phoenix, you've got the Wildcats, you've got the Illawarra Hawks, you've got Cairns, you've got Brisbane, you've got Adelaide. And out of those, only Illawarra, Perth and Phoenix have a double next week. So that's something important to keep in mind. But the other thing to keep in mind too is planning ahead again, really important all the time. Sydney next week have got their double, and then you can get rid of them because they got the 3 singles. And after next week, the teams with the 3 singles are going to be the Sydney Kings, the Cairns Taipans, who are actually going to be 4 singles after this week, and then Brisbane with 4 singles after this week. So Brisbane, Cairns, after this week, you're going to want to get rid of all of them. Sydney, after next week, you're going to want to get rid of all of them. It's a good way to try and target your planning. When you're having a look at the best sides, Illawarra at the moment only has the 1 single, which is in round 18, where there's only 2 teams that are actually on a double. So Illawarra at the moment, I would be smashing by on all the Illawarra players. Let's have a look at the second most traded out player. We've got Denzel Washington. Thinking about the wrong NBA player. Denzel Valentine. Now, Valentine, he is an easy sell. But for me, I'm also going to be holding him as an owner. Again, not a must hold. I'll explain myself because if people have the same sort of team build, it might be handy. I've currently got McCall, Denzel, and somebody else who are all dual that I can move around between guard and forward, and it's quite important to be able to do that. Denzel's also got a 29 break even. So, look, Valentine went well last week. In the first half, he scored 20 points. His floater was absolutely killing everybody. Nobody could stop it. And he ended up scoring 40 for the round. He's got Perth this week. It is at Kudos, so that's something important to remember when you're trading out these Kings players. Perth are going well. The Kings' offense last week was awesome. And if that continues on playing in Sydney, that's a tough travel for Perth. It's actually maybe not, the easy Perth game that it would have been a couple of weeks ago when the Sydney Kings weren't playing that well. So I do quite like Sydney this week to really step up against Perth at home. They played the Breakers at home, and we saw what happened with that. It's one of those ones with Valentine where he's just been solid. So you could easily trade him out if you need to, but he's not going to lose you any money. And then next week when Sydney's got the doubleheader of Phoenix and United, they're going to be playing one of those at home, one of those in Melbourne. Valentine's going to be quite handy to play. So that's why I'm keeping him. I've just got other guys that I can trade out and have guys like Valentine as duels to move my team around, and also looking ahead for the Kings next week with their double matchup. I think it's going to be important. So, he's a fine trade out though. He's pretty much he's pretty much going to be gone after next week anyway. So certainly don't let me stop you trading him out. I'm going to wait an extra week. Menenga, basically a must trade, just about. I tell you what, the Supercoach pleb, especially Jai, he has been all over the fact that Ford cannot be trusted as a coach, and you cannot trust him at all because last week he ended up benching Qual, who has been playing really well, among other changes as well. And Menenga ended up with a 0. He's got to go. And Gak ended up with the start. We'll talk about him a bit later. Anthony Lamb, this is an interesting one. He's got a 63 break even. He didn't play as well as what people would have hoped. He only scored a 55 in a double game week. I was really torn on getting him. I ended up reversing trades and not getting him in last week. I thought that he could have done really well. That's very average for him. I do expect a bounce back, but one of the things that I will mention as well, after this single game round where he will lose bulk cash, he's playing the Phoenix. Then he's got Tasmania and Illawarra. And that Tasmania Illawarra double doesn't look too bad right now. And next week you're going to want him in probably. So he's another one where if you can wait a week and then trade him out after next week, I think that's going to be the ideal scenario. But certainly people are going to be looking at Bryce Cotton. And look, Lamb to Bryce Cotton through Jules, it's an easy trade to make because Bryce Cotton's got the double this week and next week. So it kind of cancels out not having Lamb for next week's double. You can also, if you think your team's set up well, sell him this week and buy him back next week with one of your 2 trades. So that's the other option because you're going to get him back cheaper and then you can on-sell him again. But that's going to be very team dependent, depending on how your team's set up. Peter Jackson Cartwright, I tell you what, he came alive that first game last week at the end of it against Melbourne United, but against the Kings, he wasn't great. 46 points in total. That wasn't fantastic. He's gone downhill a little bit, which I was saying last week in my discussion with the Supercoach pleb. I would definitely buy Lamb over PJC, and PJC is a slight concern for me at the moment. He's still going to be good, but 363,000, I'd certainly sell him over Lamb at the moment if I was selling one of the two and I had them both. Jalen Galloway, super disappointing. I thought a month ago he might have been a bit of a value play, and I almost did it myself. He's now $193,000 with a break even of 33, and he's scoring, 21 last week in a double game round was just abysmal, especially when you consider the fact that they played Adelaide and obviously the Kings didn't play well, but they put up some points. But then they absolutely obliterated New Zealand, and he wasn't really much part of that at all. So he seems to be a little bit of an afterthought now in the Kings, and I would have to trade him after 21, 36, 14 point rounds the last 3 weeks. He's definitely a trade option. The only problem with him is now he's lost so much cash that $193,000, you're not going to go very far trading him. But him to Gak is going to be a popular one to free up 100K, and I think that's a really good trade. I've lost all faith in Galloway, not because I don't think he's a good player, but for Supercoach, there's just too many options there, and the other guys are starting to step up, and he's not really doing it. Sam Mortenberg, it's going to be the same discussion as Menenga, although he's hurt. Jonah Bolden, again, same discussion as what Galloway is. He's been disappointing. Jordan Hunter, I'm going to give a shout out to Geordie Hunter. He has been really good for me the last 3 weeks. I bought him 3 weeks ago. He's made, $60,000 in that time. He was a great trade-in at a low ownership, pod territory to get in, to make some money, play some doubles and score some points. He's definitely delivered. The last few weeks he's gone 34 in a single game week, 64 and 44. So 64 and 44 the last 2 weeks. That's pretty good. It's averaging, in the 50s for double game weeks for him. And that's what you wanted to see from someone who was only 220K 3 weeks ago. That's perfect. Exactly what you wanted. It is time to trade him on, though, and certainly it's an easy trade because he's got a break even at 32. He's not going to lose any money, so you can definitely hold him and play him next week because he's got the double next week and then on-sell him. So don't feel like you have to. But he's an easy one for me to sell, and I would choose him over guys like Valentine, for instance, or definitely over Adams if you're selling Kings players. The reason being is because, he's not a dual, so you got less flexibility with him. 272,000. He's actually worth more than a Valentine. He's worth more than what Galloway is, even if you don't need that extra money, having that in the bank for next week for your future trades, super important and something that people forget about. And the other big thing with Hunter is I really like him. I think that he's one of those players that has been pretty consistent for an inconsistent Kings team, always putting in effort, but he doesn't have much of a ceiling. He's not going to go off for 45 points. He just doesn't do it. So, he's not like an Adams or even a Valentine who can go off for a bigger game. Hunter's just going to be consistent with a good floor, not much ceiling. So happy to trade out Jordan Hunter this week. I think it's a good move. I'll be doing that myself. Quayle got benched. That's a bit of a brutal killer. I thought that he's been really good, Quayle. I'm kind of surprised that he got benched. But then again, when I remember who the coach is, I'm not surprised at all. 11 points on the weekend. That's not going to get it done. You've got to get rid of Quayle. Traded in players. Here's the exciting stuff. Bryce Cotton, number one most traded in player. And he's going to be hugely owned, and he's also going to be hugely captained. When you're having a look at him this week, he's going to cost you 460,000 plus, and that is huge coin to be getting him in. He's averaging 37.5 points a game, though. He's one of the best options in the last couple of months. He's really come alive. He's got a break even of 86, so he may be cheaper next week, but he has got that potential to sort of match that with how Bryce Cotton can go off. And he's been shooting really well lately. Couple of little caveats with him. And again, not saying it's a bad buy, just playing devil's advocate a little bit. They're playing Brisbane at home. I think that's a good matchup for Bryce. I think he'll do well. They've then got to travel to Sydney and play the Kings. Now, if the Kings play like they did against the Breakers, that's going to be a really hard road game for the Wildcats. And I'm interested at how that's going to pan out because they've got a lot of guys that they can throw at Bryce Cotton as well. It'll be interesting if they play so much zone like they did against the New Zealand Breakers. The zone against the Breakers really rattled them. I thought Jackson Cartwright in particular really struggled with that zone and knowing what to do or how to break the zone. I didn't think they busted it well at all, obviously, because they got absolutely creamed. I'm interested to see if they play the zone with Bryce Cotton and how that goes with them. It's not a slam dunk at $460,000. I'll just say that right now. And the reason I say that is because if you have a look at some of the guys that you could get this week, like if you could get two $350,000 guys. So say, look, perfect example. I could get Froling and Gary Clark in this week, or I could get Cotton and Gack in, for example. Cotton may very well be the top scorer out of those guys, but you've got to look at the combined score. What's Cotton and Gack going to do versus, say, Froling and Clark? Well, Froling and Clark can easily outscore that duo. So the overall depth that I was talking about earlier, that might actually win through if you don't have Cotton in your side. So I wouldn't say that he's a must-own, but he certainly is a very good buy. And one of the other reasons he's a very good buy is because Perth have so many doubles coming up. They've also got the double next week. So I would be much more confident if I wanted to make a risky play to say, I'm not going to buy Cotton this week if he wasn't playing a double next week. The double next week worries me a lot. And then to buy him after next week, then they've got a single, so you've got to wait. It's just a bit hard. And if people captain him and he ends up going off for 86 like his break-even is, that's going to be tough if you don't nail your captain. So I think that there's a few considerations there in purchasing Cotton. I don't think it's a slam dunk. I think that you can strategically not have him, but you're going to have to really nail your choices, your captaincy choices, and who you're bringing in as well. So along with that, I will say with Cotton too, he likes playing Sydney himself. He's got a high score of 52 against them, though that's higher than some of his high scores. It's not right up there. He certainly can go bigger than that. It's going to be interesting because he's going to be 50% owned, I reckon, and at 50% owned, you're really going to be going along with the pack there. But if you don't do it, you're going to fall behind if he goes absolutely ballistic and you make the wrong decisions. So a bit of a risk reward. Great trading though. I don't want to talk anyone off Bryce Cotton. Gack is the second most traded in player. And look, I think that this is a really easy one. It's not just because he's got a minus 19 break even. It's not just because he started last week. It's because he's an easy one to go with Cotton because he's only 96,000. And to afford Cotton, you're going to have to trade two guys basically to get him in. 46 last round. That was amazing. it was also in a round where they only played the one game. So it's crazy that he can go from single digit scoring for 5 rounds in a row and then bust out a 46 in a single game week. That is absolutely crazy. So it's going to be dicey on what Ford's going to continue to do. You'd expect that Gak's going to get in the minutes this week. So certainly in a double game week with Illawarra and Brisbane, that's going to work out really well. So it is a great time to get in Gak. There's no doubt about that. And you could make, 40K pretty quickly and then trade him out again when their singles hit or even in a couple of weeks' time and try and get to 50K or something. And he's also going to give you some scoring provided he keeps playing. So I think that he's a really good trade in, and I think it works really well when you're doing an upgrade. To give you an example of how I'm using Gak differently than people getting cotton in, though, I am going to get rid of a guy that is probably my last guy that isn't giving me good scores in my entire team, including bench, and that is Mantis Rabis. Just forget the last name. Mantis at the New Zealand Breakers. I don't want to butcher your surname, so I'll just leave it. He's about 200K. He needs to go for me. He's got a high break even, and he's just not getting it done now. He's going okay in real life, but he's more of a cog now in that than the scorer that he was a couple of weeks before when they had guys like Cheatham out and others as well. So I'm getting rid of him, and I'm getting rid of Jordan Hunter. And that's two guys combined. They're only like 400 and something thousand in value, and I have got some bank there. But I'm getting a star in, and I'm getting Gak in. And now my team only has Gak as a low scorer. And in saying that, if he does what he did last week, he'll absolutely kill it in a double game week this week anyway. So I really like getting Gak in if you've got the right expectations. But because he only costs, 96,000, you can't go wrong with it, I don't think, with a minus 19 break even. So it's still going to be a really good trade in. So moving right along, we've got Pinder coming in as the third most popular trade. I think that's pretty good. I didn't think many people would have a look at him. He's been a little bit up and down this year. I mentioned maybe a month ago I'm never going Pinder again because he just had an awful game. Scored 17 3 weeks ago. Followed that up with 24. So I think that you need to look at the fact that he's only gone 60 plus once all year, which was 71. Everything else is 51 and below, 57 and below, sorry. So he's got a lot of middling scores. He's got a lot of games where he's in the low to mid 20s, and it's not great. Now, for 318,000 with a forward centre duel that can probably, put up some points in the right circumstances if he gets the defensive stats and stuff, it's a fine grab if you want to try and jump on a hot streak for Pinder. I will say there is guys like Froling that are like $40,000 more, and that's not much more, and that is a way better draw and also far more consistent. So I think that a lot of teams could find that extra 40K and not get Pinder. At the same time as well, if you've got extra money, Alan Williams is going to be a great buy for this week, for this one round. So, yeah, I don't mind it because it's a bit of value at 318,000 if he can have some big games. But just be aware that he's had a lot of smaller games lately. Gary Clark was huge on the weekend. He was one of my trade-ins. 75-point double round. There was some talk about some worry because he got done for a DUI. I expect that we find out about that before the round starts on whether he's going to get a suspension or not. If it's low range, he may not even get a suspension. I suspect that it'll be low range and a fine, and then he'll be playing and he'll be okay. But there hasn't been any inkling of that yet. I do think that we'll find out before the round starts, hopefully in the next 24 hours or so. At 366,000, he still presents value because we've talked about how good he is and how he's rebounding. The last 6 weeks, his rebounding has been amazing. He once again got a double-double in his game on the weekend. And he's managing, if he's got 2 game weeks at the moment, he's going to basically get a double-double out of one of those 2 games. And those extra points that he's scoring in Supercoach for hitting a double-double, absolutely golden. So I love him at the moment. And I also love Illawarra's matchups this week. It has to be said, Illawarra, aside from their draw, their immediate draw for this round is golden. They play both games at Wynn Stadium in Illawarra. Cairns have to travel there, and that is a tough travel. You're coming to Sydney, and then you're doing a bus ride down to Illawarra. It isn't easy for them. Adelaide, again, another reasonably tough travel across to Illawarra to play at Wynn Stadium. And two teams that are probably better to play against at the moment. Adelaide obviously killed the Kings on the weekend, but I still think they're giving up super coach points, and Cairns is a decent matchup too. So I really love Illawarra this week. So I think Clark is a great one. I think that he's a possible captaincy option provided he's not going to get suspended, and we hear about that for sure. So I completely am on board with getting him in. Tyrell Harrison at the Bullets, break even of 780,000. I think that he's the GAC alternative. So guys are looking at him going, well, he might be a bit more solid than what GAC is. And they're also looking at the fact he scored a 60-point round on the weekend, which was huge. Great defensive stats. In that second game, I think he got 3 blocks. It's all well and good to look at him for this round. They play Perth and Cairns in a double game week, but after that, the last month of the season, they don't have any doubles. So he is going to be a rental, or you hold him for next week for a single and get a poor score out of him, and then you're going to have to move him on anyway. So I don't like him as much as Gak. He could prove me wrong, but the draw is basically the same. You've got to get rid of either of them pretty soon because their doubles are going to run out shortly. And then all of a sudden, you're spending an extra almost $100,000 on a Tyrell Harrison over just a Gak. So I just saved the money because they could score similar-ish, and then they're both going to be trade outs after that anyway. So I understand why people are looking at it. I would go Gak over him. Justin Robinson. I'm going to do a little segue here into our community questions because we had a question about Illawarra value players, guys that aren't Froling and guys that aren't Clark. And we also had a bench one last week, but this one's a bit different. Justin Robinson is 274,000. We've got Tyler Harvey at 260,000. Both those guys getting traded in, and they're getting traded in as alternatives for Gary Clark or a Froling because those guys are that little bit more expensive. Maybe you can't afford that extra $80,000 to $90,000 it's going to take to get those guys in instead. Robinson looked like a good player at the start of the season when they got him in, and he very quickly fell to mediocrity. Now, on the weekend, he scored 64 points across 2 games, which was solid. That's good scoring for him at his price point. It's important to look at the weeks before. He hit 22 and 23, the 2 rounds before that. And before that, 2-game round, 51, and then a 27. He very rarely is going to get out of the 20s at the moment, aside from the odd game, which he had on the weekend. Very rarely he's going to get out of the 20s. And for that type of money at 275,000, I still don't think that presents that much value at all. In fact, I'll say it doesn't present value at all. So you're going to get almost what you paid for probably. And then you're also going to get a fourth option, Illawarra, which brings me on to my next point. Illawarra's got a great draw. I love it, but I would be getting Froling, I would be getting Clark, and I wouldn't be able to get 3 Illawarra players. As good as their draw is, you don't want 3 from one team. And why not get the first 2 options? Why get the third or fourth option? I like Harvey a bit more than what I do Robinson because I don't love Harvey at this point of his career, but on the weekend he showed that he can have a big one still, and he scored 69 points. And he's also cheaper than Robinson at only 260,000. He's also got a break even of 28 in a double game week. Yeah, you got to be aware of the floor. And on the week before last, he scored a 12-point round. That is in him as well. So he has a worse floor than what Robinson does, but he has a much better ceiling than what Robinson does. And he is a guy that has always gone on hot streaks because it's all about his shooting, it's all about his threes dropping, it's all about his field goal and his points. If he goes on a bit of a hot streak, it can be worth it at 260,000. Cairns and Adelaide at home is the perfect time to jump on him for a bit of a streak. And then after that, they've got Perth and they've got New Zealand, with New Zealand being at home. That Perth game can be really tough for them, but you can even hold him for that. And then you can punt him and get someone else. So I don't mind Harvey. If I was going to choose out of the 2, I'd choose Harvey. But I would try my absolute best to get Froling and Clark in, provided Clark's not going to be suspended. If Clark's suspended, that hugely inflates the value of getting a Tyler Harvey in. And I think that makes it even better to have a look at Tyler Harvey. Now, we've got Isaac Humphries getting traded in quite a bit. Double game week for Adelaide. And at 335,000, he's a lot more expensive than what he was. He's got a 37 break even, but it's got to be said, he's been pod up until this point. He's at 9% at the moment. and he has been killing it. 88-point double game round. Then he had 23 the week before, solid. 70-point double game round the week before, and then 30, 37, 30. He's basically scored 30 points a game every game from round 10, aside from round 14 where he got 23. Now, that's incredible consistency. He's on a really big tear, and he's doing it under the new coach who obviously is using him a lot better. So I can't really discourage anyone too much from getting him in. The only thing that I will say is there might be some other guys with a better ceiling for his price, because I think that the Supercoach pleb, Jai, nailed it a few weeks ago where he really liked getting in Humphreys, and he was 275,000, or I think Jai might have even got him in at 243,000. 243 or 275, that's value. You get him in for that. It's a great buy. When you're talking about paying 335, all of a sudden the value's a little bit diminished. Might not really be there, and I'm a bit worried about missing out on some of the other players that might have a better ceiling. Like, for instance, Mitch Creek this week, if you're just looking at 1 week plays, Mitch Creek's 50k more. I know it's 50k, but a lot of people have bank at the moment. It's just one example. Froling is 20k more. Clark is 30k more. These guys I would rather have, and I do think that with the Illawarra guys, if you don't have them, they're long-term holds where you can do other trades in the future weeks. So I'm not going to discourage someone from Humphreys. If you've got those Illawarra guys and you decide you want to go for Humphreys, look, I can't talk you out of it. He's been too consistent, and he does have that duel, so it is a good buy still. Froling, I do prefer though, and he's getting traded in heaps. I've already spoken about Clark. Froling's 364,000. He's in 21% of teams, but not enough teams are probably getting him in that should. He had a 67-point round on the weekend. Before that, he had 45 points, and he's gone 70 plus. But more importantly, we've had a few 60 plus rounds from him. More often than not, if he's got 2 games, he's going to get you 60 plus very consistently. And at the moment, Illawarra have all these double game weeks bar 1 round. So you're looking at 60 plus points from him for the rest of the year bar 1. That is a really good buy, and that's what kills someone like Humphreys for me. I'm going to get Froling in this week myself at the moment, and I think Froling and Gack in for me is probably going to be my trades, and I really like having Clark and Froling. So anyone getting Froling in at the moment, I think it's a great trade in, especially when he's got that dual of forward centre. He's only averaging 29.9. He hasn't hit 30 plus average. But if you do have a look at what he's been doing the last couple months, he is a 30s player, and he's always going to get you 30s at the moment. And with Illawarra in the top 4 now, they're killing it under Tatum Senior. I think that's going to continue. They're going to keep leaning on Clark. They're going to keep leaning on Froling, and they're going to keep leaning on their veterans. So I really like that trade. And the only other one that's getting done at the moment in the top 10 is Mitch Creek. 392,000, decent enough price for Mitch Creek. 31.9 points per game. Not going quite as well as the Mitch Creek of old, but he's still been pretty solid. He's got Adelaide and New Zealand this week, and New Zealand is away. That's going to be a tough one, but you need to have a look at how teams are going right now, and New Zealand looked awful against the Kings. Now, it might be a one-off, in which case that's a tough travel. If it's not a one-off and New Zealand are actually coming apart and crumbling, which could happen, then that could be a really good matchup for the Sam Phoenix. And Phoenix as well are a team that really need the wins at the moment. They've got to stay in touch with the finals, and they don't have too long to do it. They've got Creek back, they've got Source back. I think they've got Nader back as well. It's an opportune time for someone like Creek to really step up, and he was quite good last week with a 40-point single game, and he's done that for 2 weeks in a row, scoring 40 plus. So he could be an 80 plus play this week. He could be Bryce Cotton at $80,000 discount. That very well could happen. They could score the same, but for $80,000 less. So I like Creek. The only thing to note as well is that Creek does have the doubles for 2 weeks in a row now. And one of the great things about getting him in this week is the next 4 games across the next 2 rounds, 3 out of those 4 are played in Melbourne. And that is absolutely gold. Sydney and Perth aren't the easiest ones for them at the moment, and that's for next round. But both of those are in Melbourne. So it's much better for them to be playing those games in Melbourne. So I don't love Love the matchups next week, but the fact that 3 out of 4 are going to be played in Melbourne, that's huge for Creek. When we're talking about guys who haven't been mentioned because they're not getting traded in too much, I think the Source is a decent shout at the moment. He's got two weeks in a row now where he's going to be playing doubles, and that's a really good opportune time to be getting him in, as opposed to, say, a Pinder, as opposed to a Humphreys, even as opposed to a Froling. Like, I love Froling, but if you want to maybe look at him at the back end of the season instead, or you want to play both, and I love playing them both. Like, if you got Froling and you got the dual capability to move him to a forward spot, you could start Froling at forward this week, and you could start Source Williams at centre, and that is a brutal combo as far as consistency and knowing that you're going to get 60 plus points from both of those guys. So I would definitely have a look at Source for sure if you've got the money to do that as well. But yeah, that's the end of Market Watch. That's probably the most relevant players. We do need to talk about the community results, because I tell you what, I said it earlier in the show, the community results have been absolute gold. Overall, can I just give a shout out to Vern, mate? He is 62 overall now, and he's just been killing it consistently all year. Kane Anderson, Dr. Kando, he is 208. The Supercoach Hub Godfather is killing it in NBL, and he doesn't even watch basketball, so have a look at that. Chad Bates, 234, and Davey is at 242 when we're having a look at the round 15 scores. James Vern all got 528, so Vern is still killing it every single round, like I said. Matrix from Insight Fantasy Sports, 484. Nice return to form from him. And Cam Bailey, the usage rate, 484 as well. So quite good scores from the community there, and from some content creators as well, and some really high ranks from a few of those guys as well in round 15. So well done to everybody. Well done to the community. If you want to get more involved, like I said, hit up there for Discord and join. You'll enjoy it very much. But that's the show for this week. Next week we will have a double with a guest on as well. Going to be the last month, so we're going to put out some bangers. Going to get some good guests on. If you want to subscribe, do it on YouTube so you can watch us. Otherwise, you can also do it on Spotify too. If you want to have a look at my other show, the NRL All Stars podcast, my baby, we are here with the preseason podcast this week for the team previews for NRL. And those NRL Supercoach episodes are going to be coming weekly for the next couple of months leading into the NRL season. And, once the NRL season starts, we'll also get the Talking Footy episodes too. So if you just like to listen to rugby league, listen to me and some of the guests that I get on, because it's some great banter and some great talk, whether you like Supercoach or you just like footy. But that's another week. So good luck, everyone, in the NBL for round 16. Hopefully everybody gets green arrows and makes the right captaincy choices and trades. Until then, I'm Barnesy. I'll chat to you again real soon.